let's jump right into this explainer, where we're going to completely demystify the complex web of gallstones and biliary disease. We're going to take a vast amount of clinical data and organize it using a classic, highly structured medical framework. So if you've ever known someone who suddenly had to rush to the hospital after a heavy, greasy meal with just excruciating abdominal pain, or honestly, if you've just been curious about what actually happens when the body's internal plumbing goes wrong, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get started.
To keep things incredibly focused today, we're strictly following the Dapsicamp medical framework as our roadmap. That means we'll be hitting the definition and etiology, the pathophysiology, signs and symptoms, investigations, complications, and lastly, management.
All right, Section 1, Definition and Etiology.
Let's lay the foundation. What exactly is a gallstone, and who is at the highest risk of actually getting them? To put it incredibly simply, a gallstone is essentially a chemical imbalance in your bile that solidifies over time. You see, your bile is made up of a few key things: cholesterol, biopigments, which come from broken down hemoglobin, and phospholipids. When the delicate concentrations of these specific elements fall out of harmony, they basically crystallize, and these hardened deposits start to slowly form right there in the gallbladder.
Now, it turns out not all stones are the same. We generally categorize them into three unique types. First up, you have pigment stones. These are small, friable, and typically caused by hemolysis, which is the excessive breaking down of red blood cells. Second, we have mixed stones. These are faceted and contain a real mix of calcium salts, pigment, and cholesterol. And finally, cholesterol stones, which are often large and solitary. Looking at the data, obesity greatly increases the risk of these cholesterol stones by enhancing biliary cholesterol secretion. To put that into perspective, a person who is 50% above their ideal body weight actually has a 6-fold increased incidence of symptomatic stones. That is a massive jump.
So, the absolutely crucial point to understand here is that it's all about supersaturation. In medicine, this concept is known as Admirand's triangle. Basically, if cholesterol goes up, or if lecithin and bile salts go down, boom, a stone forms. But what is truly fascinating here, and totally counterintuitive, is that this supersaturation can actually be triggered by extreme fasting diets. Yeah, fasting decreases the phospholipid component of bile, making fasting-induced cholecystitis a very real, very dangerous complication of extreme crash diets.
Moving on to Section 2, Pathophysiology.
Let's see how this builds from a mere chemical imbalance into a severe mechanical problem. Believe it or not, roughly 90% of gallstones remain completely asymptomatic. They literally just sit there quietly, minding their own business. The real disease process kicks off when a stone decides it wants to travel. Trouble truly begins when that stone migrates out of the gallbladder and gets wedged in either the cystic duct or further down in the common bile duct. Think of it like a plumbing issue. A blocked pipe leads to pressure, that pressure leads to swelling, and eventually you get massive inflammation.
Okay, Section 3, Signs and Symptoms.
What does this migrating stone actually feel like for the patient? Well, there is a massive medical misconception we need to clear up right now. The term biliary colic is actually totally misleading. It is not a colicky, wave-like pain coming and going. Rather, it's a constant, steady pain in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen that often radiates straight to the back or the right shoulder blade. Now, if a patient just has biliary colic, they won't have a fever. But if that trapped stone causes acute cholecystitis, which means actual active inflammation of the gallbladder, that's when the patient develops a fever, an elevated white blood cell count, and local peritonism, which is this severe, rigid tenderness in the abdomen.
A classic, just brilliant clinical heuristic to spot this is called Murphy's sign. It's a hallmark physical exam finding for cholecystitis. Basically, the doctor lays 2 fingers over the patient's right upper quadrant and asks them to take a really deep breath in. As the lungs expand, they push that inflamed, angry gallbladder right down into the doctor's fingers, causing a sudden, involuntary arrest of inspiration due to the pain. It's an incredibly simple yet highly effective diagnostic tool.
But hold on a second. Before we assume every single gallbladder issue is just a rogue stone, we have to ask a critical diagnostic question. When is a palpable, enlarged gallbladder completely unrelated to gallstones? The answer to that lies in Courvoisier's law. This medical rule tells us that if a patient comes in with painless jaundice, and you can actually feel an enlarged gallbladder on exam, it is highly unlikely to be caused by gallstones.
Why? Well, chronic gallstones constantly irritate the gallbladder over time, causing it to become fibrosed, shrunken, and basically unexpandable. So a large, painless gallbladder paired with jaundice points much more strongly toward a far more sinister cause, something like pancreatic or gallbladder cancer that's silently causing the blockage.
So, Section 4, Investigations. Let's dive right into the detective work.
How do we actually visualize these stones inside the body? In practice, doctors don't just jump straight to the most invasive test. They escalate systematically. Step 1 is almost always an ultrasound. It's cheap, it's non-invasive, and it's absolutely fantastic at detecting stones, thick gallbladder walls, and dilated ducts. If we need a better look deep into the common bile duct, Step 2 is an MRCP. That's an MRI technique that gives us brilliant, detailed images of the entire biliary tree without using any invasive instruments. Finally, if we know for sure there is a stone stuck deep in the duct that desperately needs to come out, we move to Step 3, an ERCP. This actually uses an endoscope guided down the throat to not only diagnose the exact blockage, but physically pull the stone right out of the duct.
Now, you might be wondering, why go through all that? Why don't we just use a simple X-ray, like we do for a broken arm? Well, unlike kidney stones, which light up beautifully on an X-ray, only about 10% of gallstones are radio-opaque. Because the vast majority are made of cholesterol rather than calcium, they simply don't show up at all on a standard plain abdominal X-ray. They're virtually invisible to it.
All right, let's explore the stakes in Section 5, Complications.
What actually happens when we don't catch these stones in time? If a stone entirely blocks the common bile duct, the stagnant bile backing up behind it can get infected. This leads to a condition called Ascending Cholangitis, and it is characterized by Charcot's triad: right upper quadrant pain, fever with intense shaking rigors, and jaundice. Make no mistake, this isn't just a bad stomachache you can wait out at home on the couch. It is a true medical emergency that requires prompt intravenous antibiotics and urgent duct clearance to save the patient's life.
Another severe complication can be remembered using a classic and slightly amusing medical mnemonic: get smashed. This details the various causes of acute pancreatitis. And right at the very top, at the letter G, you'll see that gallstones are actually the #1 cause of acute pancreatitis. They account for a whopping 38% of cases, edging out alcohol, which sits at 35%, while things like trauma are way down at 1.5%. As the gallstone travels down the common bile duct, it can block the adjacent pancreatic duct, causing the pancreas to become horribly inflamed and essentially start auto-digesting itself.
The domino effect of a migrating stone doesn't even stop there. An inflamed gallbladder can adhere to the nearby intestine, and over time, a massive stone can erode straight through the tissue into the duodenum, traveling down the digestive tract and causing a complete bowel obstruction. This is known as gallstone ileus. Alternatively, the completely obstructed gallbladder can simply fill up over time, forming a swollen sac of mucus known as a mucochele, or a highly dangerous pocket of pus called an empyema, and in rare cases known as Marizzi syndrome. A large stone just sitting in the gallbladder can become so bulky it presses externally on the main bile duct, causing jaundice without ever actually entering the duct itself.
Finally, we reach the end of our framework, Section 6, Management.
How do we definitively fix these plumbing issues? Decades ago, surgeons heavily preferred waiting 6 to 12 weeks after an acute attack before operating. The idea was to let the inflammation cool down. But the modern consensus has completely shifted. We now heavily favor early laparoscopic removal, ideally within 24 hours of an acute episode. Early surgery is just as safe, it shortens the overall hospital stay, and most importantly, it prevents those life-threatening complications like pancreatitis from striking while the patient is sitting anxiously on a waiting list. Waiting around actually risks an 18% chance of a repeat cholecystitis attack.
But what if a patient is simply too elderly or frail for general anesthesia? If surgery is deemed too risky, doctors do have minimally invasive fallbacks. They can safely drain the infected gallbladder using a percutaneous tube inserted right through the skin, a procedure called a cholecystotomy. Or they can use that ERCP scope we mentioned earlier to pull stones directly out of the ducts without ever making a surgical incision.
So we've essentially mastered the mechanical plumbing of gallstones. We know exactly how to find them, how to drain them, and how to surgically remove them. But it does leave us with a lingering, fascinating thought. What mysterious genetic and environmental factors are actually driving complex autoimmune biliary diseases like primary biliary cirrhosis and primary sclerosing cholangitis that we still can't easily cure with a scalpel? The plumbing is solved, sure, but the deeper biology is still waiting to be fully demystified. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll catch you next time.